Hello and welcome to another TLDR Explains video. With the 2020 election year heating up, we thought that it would be a good time to explain the Electoral College and the role it has in electing the President of the United States. The Electoral College is not an institute of higher learning, as its name might suggest. In fact, the 538-member body that is responsible for electing the President and Vice President of the United States doesn't even meet in one place at one time, which is probably good for social distancing. So, in this video, we're going to take a look at what the Electoral College is, how it works, and why some are calling for its abolition and replacement with a national popular vote system. I know I've said this a lot lately, so I'll keep it brief. We're tantalisingly close to 100,000 subscribers on this channel, so if you haven't already, please hit subscribe to help us reach the milestone. And when we do, we have an exciting announcement. Before we get into the mechanics of how the Electoral College works, let's first look at the source of the institution, the US Constitution. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 states, "Each state shall appoint a number of electors, equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress." This means that each state is allocated a number of electors, according to the total number of representatives and senates that state has in Congress. It also means that when an individual is voting on election day, they're not actually voting for the candidate. Instead, they're voting for a slate of electors that will then vote for their respective party candidate. Let's take Texas for example. It has 36 representatives in the House based on its population, and every state has 2 senators. So, Texas has 38 electoral votes. Currently, as there are 435 members of the House and 100 members of the Senate, that makes 535 total electors. But, because of the 23rd Amendment to the Constitution, which allocates the same number of electors to Washington, D.C. as the least populous state, currently Wyoming with 3, the total number of votes cast is 538. And a candidate merely needs a simple majority of 270 to win the presidency. Historically, we find out who won the election on election night, or at least in the wee hours of the next morning. But the Electoral College doesn't actually vote until several weeks after the election, on the Monday after the second Wednesday in December, when electors meet in their state capitals and cast their votes. Then, on January 6th, a newly installed Congress holds a joint session in which the electoral votes are opened, counted, and the election of a new president and vice president are certified. The framers of the Constitution knew that a tie or a lack of majority was a possibility, so redundancies were put in place to make sure that these possibilities would be resolved. According to the National Archives and Records Administration, an independent agency of the US government that's charged with the preservation of government documents and historical records, if there's a tie or no candidate gets a majority, the House of Representatives, as the People's House, decides from the top 3 candidates who received votes in the Electoral College, and each state delegation gets 1 vote. The state delegations vote amongst themselves as to how they want to cast that 1 vote. If the majority of representatives within a state agree, then the vote is cast for that candidate. And if again there's a tie within the state's delegation, then that state's vote is totally discarded. In the case of a similar situation in the vice presidential election, the Senate would decide among candidates, with each senator casting 1 vote. In either case, a simple majority of the votes cast is required for the election. It's worth noting here that as congressional elections are done at the same time as presidential elections, the selection of the president and vice president described above would be done by the new Congress. And while in this current Congress the Republicans control 26 state delegations and control the Senate, the 2020 election could certainly change that balance. So theoretically, if Democrats were to take control of the Senate but not increase their majority in the House, we could see a Republican president and a Democratic vice president. Something to keep in mind though is that a tie or a lack of majority in the Electoral College is an extremely rare occurrence, having only happened twice, in 1800 and in 1824. In 1800, a tie between Vice President Thomas Jefferson and his running mate Aaron Burr caused the election to be decided by the House after Burr refused to stand aside for Jefferson. At the time, the electors cast 2 votes, one for the president and one for the vice president. As such, the person who came first became the president, and the runner-up became the vice president. Jefferson eventually won out after 36 ballots in the House. To keep this circumstance from happening again, the 12th Amendment was proposed that separated the presidential and vice presidential elections into separate ballots. In 1824, the 4 candidates split the electoral vote, meaning no majority and thus no election. The House of Representatives ended up electing John Quincy Adams on the first ballot. So, as you can see, either circumstance is rare. However, it's still a possibility. So let's bring this back to today and ask, what would prevent those 538 electors from electing someone other than the 2 major party candidates? Well, the short answer is that nothing in the Constitution prohibits this. However, some states have laws which require electors to vote for the candidate that won the popular vote within their state, while other states leave the decision to individual electors. When an elector casts their vote for someone other than the candidate who won their state, the elector is said to be a faithless elector. It's worth noting, though, that this is also a rare occurrence. In fact, before the 7 faithless electors in 2016, there had only been 1 faithless elector since 1988, which came in 2004, and that was likely an accident. It's also worth noting in June that the Supreme Court ruled unanimously in Chiefalo v. Washington that states do have the right to bind electors to the popular vote winner of their state. As a result, we could see more states enacting laws which require electors to vote with the state's popular vote. Now, you might be wondering why the framers of the Constitution didn't go with a direct popular vote system. In order to answer that, we have to take a look at the Federalist Papers, a set of 85 essays written by James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. Amid the debate over ratification of the new Constitution, these essays laid out the arguments in favour of the document and explain why they set up the government in the way they did. Federalist 68 lays out the arguments for an indirectly elected chief executive, where it lays out 2 primary arguments for this indirect election. Firstly, the framers felt that voters did not have access to information to be able to make an informed decision. And secondly, they were afraid of the tyranny of the majority, in which the majority of the country held the power over the minority. So the Electoral College was a compromise between those who wanted a direct national popular vote and those who wanted Congress to choose the president. Now, the Electoral College does have one main characteristic that led to some calling for its abolition. 5 times in US history, the winner of the electoral vote has lost the national vote. John Quincy Adams in 1824, Rutherford B. Hayes in 1876, Benjamin Harrison in 1988, George W. Bush in 2000, and most notably, Donald Trump in 2016. Some would say that this is a rarity and not worth considering, as less than 10% of the country's 58 presidential elections have had this result. However, others say that it's a matter of principle that the candidate who receives the most votes should win the office. To that end, some states have begun passing a law known as the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. This law would award the state's electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote, regardless of who won in the state's popular vote. However, this will not become active until enough states sign on to make up at least 270 electoral votes. According to their website, nationalpopularvote.com, 15 states and the District of Columbia have signed on thus far, but the total number of electoral votes towards the project is only 197, so it still has a ways to go before it would affect the outcome of the presidential elections. One other thing to point out is, with the exception of Maine and Nebraska, states award their electoral votes on a winner-takes-all basis. Maine and Nebraska, however, award their electoral votes based on the popular vote in each congressional district. Another proposal is to have all states award their electoral votes proportionally. This would give Democrats who live in predominantly red states, and likewise Republicans who live in predominantly blue states, a real voice in the Electoral College, which is normally ignored. But it's worth noting here that there are only 2 ways of accomplishing such a proposal. The first, and probably most difficult, is to pass a congressional amendment requiring states to award their electoral votes proportionally. I say more difficult because amending the Constitution is quite a lengthy and complicated process. The second option is for states to individually begin passing laws that would award their electoral votes proportionately. The problem there is probably obvious. As Maine and Nebraska are the only two states to award electoral votes in a proportional way, you'd have to get the other 48 states to pass a law requiring electors to be awarded proportionally. That said, neither option is particularly easy. So, what do you think? Should the president be elected by a national popular vote? Or should the states convert to a proportional electoral system like Maine and Nebraska? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And as always, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we post. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of the videos, like Rishap Willem, Marco Sella and Sean Williams Ilisel, then be sure to back us on Patreon. The link is in the description.